Thank you. Thank you very much. This is great. I'm glad we didn't go right after the drum line, so that was good. Michelle, at the first of all, at the Institution of Higher Education Policy, you've been researching higher ed for several presidential cycles now, right? What issues do you think policymakers should be prioritizing now as we, approach another election cycle?
Right. So happy to be here. Happy to be here with you, Kim. And it's true that, right now we're in the midst of an election season. I read somewhere earlier this week that we are about 265 days out from the Iowa caucuses. And there's already lots of momentum around the election cycle. And I think regardless of party affiliation, one thing that we consistently hear from people who want to be presidential hopefuls or sit in that seat, as well as people who are already in office, is everyone talks about the American citizen. And everyone recognizes that the strength of our nation, the brilliance of our nation, is all dependent upon American citizens' ability to prosper. And higher education plays a very important role in helping people to prosper. And to ensure that higher education can really fulfill the mission of doing that the way that it should, we have to have institutions that are high quality, and they have to be affordable for average Americans. Like, that's really, really important. As we think about on a tactical level, what has to happen, I think there are 5 critical things that people in leadership need to be thinking about. And the first, for me, is really about equity. We have a history in this country of long-standing intractable problems around access and completion, and we know that this has a disproportionate impact on people of color and low-income students. And if we want to see different outcomes, we've got to do things differently. And the way to do that is by having a lens on equity. So I think every policy proposal we hear from the presidential candidates has to be evaluated to ensure that it is going to actually do something positive for low-income students and people of color. The others I'll just kind of go through quickly because you've probably been hearing about them all day long already, is around college completion. We have a completion challenge in our country. We have less than half of the people who enter college, a 2-year or 4-year institution, actually complete. We have 35 million Americans who are walking around with some college, no degree. We've got to get these people back into college. We've got to get them across the finish line. We have an affordability challenge. We had the students talking about free college. So you already know that affordability is an issue for so many students, and we've got to figure out how to make college available for the lowest income families. Like, that's a critical priority. Also, we need to be looking at the issue of accountability and transparency and ensuring that we have data that is transparent, that helps students and families make really good decisions about where to college, and so they understand what the outcomes of these institutions might be before they actually enroll. And lastly, I just believe we have to expand opportunities to everyone. Everyone should have the ability to benefit from our institutions, and that means even those who are currently and formerly incarcerated. Like, that's what I think this should be about, and this is what we should be holding our leadership to the fire on.
Great. What do you think are the ways that higher education actually adds value to our society?
Well, there's certainly a lot of value that I believe higher education can add, and the one I'll just talk about is really around economic freedom. And economic freedom is really important to me because I think it is the foundation for so many other things that a person can do and the ways that society can benefit. So if you have economic freedom, you can have a stronger democracy. You can have a healthier community. You can eliminate poverty. But economic freedom is what is critical. I think that, the thing about value is, even though there is tremendous value in earning a degree or credential, the challenge is that value is not equally distributed. So we see that low-income students and students of color often have unexpected and unfortunate outcomes that they did not anticipate even with their college degree. For example, Black students often take out loans and they struggle more than any other racial group to pay them back. It's really a very sad story. And when you think about all the families that are sending their sons and their daughters to college so that they can have upward mobility, and that student loan repayment struggle is not really helping them advance, that's the type of value that I don't think that student and his or her family really anticipated. And the same thing for low-income students. Low-income students, the average low-income student has to come up with 157% of their income to pay for college. You know what it is for the highest income student? 14%. That is disparate impact of value. And that's what I think we really have to fix and think about as we move forward with higher education.
Okay. What are the ways we can measure the value of college in general and a particular college or a particular program specifically?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of different ways you can do this. So at the institutional level, what we have found is that many institutions and their IR team, their presidential leadership, they have access to really good data. And
That they keep
private.
Right.
And some of them use, and some of them don't. But the ones that have been able to make the biggest impact in terms of graduation and really closing these equity gaps are actually using the data. And we had a report where we really showed some examples. It's called Leading with Data, where presidents and their leadership team are really not just looking at it, not just disaggregating, but moving beyond just saying we have disaggregated data and actually doing something with it. And that's where the rubber meets the road. The other thing is that on a broader level, at the state level and at the federal level, I think people are looking at outcomes, but they're also trying to start thinking about program level outcomes, not just the big graduation rate, but what majors have better outcomes for students. And they're also looking at
by outcomes, you mean earnings or student loan repayment?
Exactly.
Is there any other measure that you...
Yeah, and that's what I was about to get at, like labor market outcomes, like really seeing how students fare after they graduate, and looking at how they are able to advance in their career 5, 10, 15 years out.
But strictly financial indicators.
Right. Right now, a lot of it's been around financial indicators because that's often what's available on a broad national and state level. But there's been some movement and a lot of discussion towards looking at these non-economic variables and really talking more about fulfillment, quality of life, voting, civic participation, and how does all of that play into students' well-being? You know, that's a word that often gets tossed around. But even with that, I would say that people recognize that in order to reap the benefits of these non-economic outcomes, you got to have a good job. And so they often go hand in hand. I wouldn't say that one's more important than the other, but both of them are really essential in terms of having a quality life.
Well, you know, often it's said that what gets measured is what counts.
That's right.
And so how do we measure some of these more important, or how do we make these more important societal benefits, such as voting? How do we make them count do we have a way to measure them, or?
I think that's a challenge. I think, you know, one of the limitations and the challenges of our current data infrastructure is so many students don't even count, and so many outcomes don't count. And what I mean by that is that the data system that we have right now to really look at students and their outcomes don't have all students included in them. And so we are now able to look at things like beyond first-time, full-time students. We're able to look at students who transfer from one institution, but we can't disaggregate that data by race. So there's still a big limitation there. And some of our financial aid databases, we are able to look at students who have financial aid, but we aren't able to look at how they fare against students who don't have financial aid. And when you look at the students who don't have financial aid, that's about 30% of the students who we lose by not counting them. So you're right, what gets measured count. And unfortunately, too many things that are essential and really important aren't getting counted.
And is there any way we can address that, or is that just we can't?
Well, there's a lot of things that are happening right now. Right now, there is legislation, current legislation in Congress through the College Transparency Act that would do a complete overhaul of our current data infrastructure. And one of the things that it would really prioritize is making sure that we can count all students, making sure that we can count all outcomes and things like graduation and employment and beyond, but also being accessible to students and their families so that they can really make important decisions about college. And right now, we don't have that available to students in the ways that you would imagine.
So we have a few seconds left. I'm going to ask you one quick question. What are we paying attention to? What is getting measured that is a problem we shouldn't be paying attention to? What is a lot of noise and you know, making a lot of heat and no light?
Well, I think the thing that we should be paying attention to is, like I said earlier, we need to be counting all students.
Yeah.
And we need a data infrastructure that can count all students. I think what often gets talked about in the midst of that is institutional burden. And if we had a system that counted all students like the one that's being proposed through the College Transparency Act, it would completely eliminate a lot of the burden that many institutional leaders have been talking about, and it would improve the system dramatically.
Okay, great. All right, thanks a lot.